Well, good evening. It's good to see you guys. As Josh said, my name is Matthew Young. I'm a site pastor over in Moscow, but excited to be here with you guys tonight. Excited. Honestly, I'm excited for Thanksgiving. I love Thanksgiving. It's the greatest week of the year, greatest holiday of the year, I think. That's how I feel about it right now in this moment. I'm looking forward to feasting on Thursday. That's one of my favorite parts. I've been trying to pace myself, and I've calculated it out. Starting today, if I lose a pound a day up until Thursday, it'd be 4 pounds that I would have lost, which means I can eat 4 more pounds of food on Thursday. So if you want to try that, we could do that together, and we can work together towards Thanksgiving. Excited about that. I like to eat. I like Thanksgiving. Many of you know this about me. When I was in, one of the reasons Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday, when I was in college, I got my undergrad degree in poultry science. It's poultry science, not political science, poultry science. So chickens and turkeys, that's what I got a degree from college in. And so every year, this is about the only day out of the year that I get to use my degree that I spent all that money and time on. And so I always nominate myself, volunteer to carve the turkey because I get to use all this wealth of knowledge that I learned in school about the anatomy of a turkey. And so, it's really exciting for me and to remember those times and to carve the turkey and put my skills to use. It's a great day of the year. I also, being that I have a degree in poultry science, also with that comes some wonderful facts and information about poultry, about turkeys and chickens, and jokes. And so I wanted to share some of those with you. A good question for you: which side of the turkey has the most feathers?
Right side. Outside.
Yeah, the outside. Yeah, exactly. There's no feathers on the inside. I don't know if you guys knew that or not. That's what my degree told me. Also, did you hear about the turkey that got arrested? Yeah, the police suspected him of foul play. That's stupid. It's also the same reason why you don't invite live turkeys to your Thanksgiving feast, because foul language. Yeah. Okay. I hope the sermon gets better than that. Excited for tonight and where we're headed in this series, Legendary. Where we are remembering God and who He is and how that redeems who we are. When we get to know our God, when we get to know God, it clarifies for us who He is, which in that clarifies for us who we are. And when we see God for who He is, it helps us to know who we are, who He made us to be in relationship to Him. And so we've been looking at these different stories these past 2 weeks, and we continue in the coming weeks. These phenomenal stories, these somewhat legendary stories of God and how He interacted with His creation through the Old Testament. And so tonight we're going to look at a story that some of you may be familiar with. It's not a real well-known story, but maybe as we get into it, you're like, wait, I think I've heard this one before. It's not super familiar, but it's an intriguing story, and the more I've read it over the past couple of weeks, I get more and more intrigued by it, and the characters in it they're really cool people, and I think throughout this story it points towards, while it's in the Old Testament, points towards Christ. You see the character of God displayed throughout this story. So stoked about getting into this tonight. And so if you have your copy of Scripture, you can open that up to 2 Kings is where we'll be, 2 Kings. It's buried up there in the Old Testament through this narrative time of telling the story of Israel, and we'll be in 2 Kings chapter 5. So if you want to flip there, you can. We'll project it up here. We're going to spend the bulk of the time walking through the first 19 verses of chapter 5 in 2 Kings. And as we do that, and as you flip there, I want to give a shout out to our friends over at Central Washington University, and as they will be joining us at the sermon in a few weeks. So in this passage, in this story, in the timeline of Israel and where they were kind of in a rough spot in their nation's history. They had a time when they had no king. This is the book of Kings, so it talks about kings and their different leadership and their interactions with their both good and bad in their leadership. They'd had a time in the past when they didn't have a king, and they said, we really want to be like all the other nations around us, and God, give us a king. So he answered their prayers, and He said, okay, you can have a king. And that went good at times, and it went really poorly most of the time. because the people said, we want a man to lead us, we want a person to lead us. And God kept saying, no, I'm here to lead you. And so he said, okay, fine, I'll give you what you want, and you'll see the folly in that. And so it only took a few generations of kings for things to go poorly. So much so that at this point, Israel had actually been split into two different nations. And so the part that we'll talk about, the northern part, which was called Israel at this point, and they'd had several kings that were bad kings that worshiped other gods, that didn't lead their people to follow God, to worship the God that had brought them to where they were. And so subsequently, there were these guys called prophets. We heard about one 2 weeks ago with the prophet Hosea. That was one that Drew preached on 2 weeks ago. And how these guys, they would come and they were the voice of God, the men of God, who would speak to the people on God's behalf. And they would say harsh things, rough things sometimes. And tonight we'll hear about a guy, one of the prophets. His name was Elisha, and he was crazy. If you go in and you start reading some 2 Kings, if you want to read some 2 Kings this week, you'll read some stories. You're like, why is that in the Bible? I don't understand, because he did crazy things. Like just before this, and the chapters just before this that we'll read tonight, Elisha was walking along, and these young boys come out and start mocking him, and he calls out 2 bears that come out and maul 42 kids. What? Why is that in the Bible? I don't know, because it's kind of this just weird story. Right after this, he's out cutting wood with some of his fellow prophets to build a new house, and one of them drops an axe head in a river, and they're like, oh no, the axe head fell in the river, and Elisha makes it float so they can get the axe head back. They're in the Bible. I don't know why. And and honestly, I think the broader picture, even outside of chapter 5 that we're looking at tonight, was that even though these men did not do well, these kings did not do well at leading their people, there were these men of God, as they continue to refer to throughout the Old Testament, these prophets who spoke, who were the mouthpiece of God to speak to the people, both through their writings, through their lives, through their actions, through the miraculous things they did. When people would see them acting and doing and living, people should have been able to look at them and say, oh, okay, that's who our God is. He is holy. You don't disrespect God because he calls out bears. And he is miraculous, and he knows your needs. And if you drop an axe head that you borrowed from someone else, you should return it. And so we got to get it out of the river. And so they're the stories that were these prophets would give a picture of who this God was. And so it's there that we find ourselves in chapter 5. Of a story where Elisha is one of the main characters. There's a couple other characters, and one of the other main characters, his name was Naaman. Naaman, Naaman. You might pronounce it, nah, man, maybe. So Naaman, if you want to pick up with me in verse 1, we're going to read through this and learn about this guy, and through that learn about our God. Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master, and highly regarded because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. So there's this guy Naaman, and he was an important guy. Surrounding Israel at this point, as they began to have issues within themselves and poor leadership from their kings, not drawing them to their God, but instead chasing after other things, worshiping other gods, things began to fall apart because they were being disobedient. And so the nation of Israel was having all these issues, and in that, there were nations around them that were growing and having success. And in some ways, as it says right here, that the Lord, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. So it's this nation that was not God's people, but God was allowing them to flourish and have victory in times of war and in battles, so that God could essentially correct Israel, to draw them back to himself. And so through them, God was using this guy, Naaman, to lead this army against Israel and against others. And in that, Naaman was important. This country, Aram, they had a king, but even Naaman probably had more popularity than maybe even the king did. He was liked. He was the hero. He was an important guy. But he had leprosy. Leprosy is a skin disease that you see about in scriptures. It even still exists today, but it's curable today. They figured it out. It's a bacterial disease. But back in these days, it was not curable. And so it was an issue for him, and it eventually would lead to his death if he didn't deal with it. So while he was very important, had all of his stuff together, was a great commander, well respected by the king, well respected by the people. He was at the height of his life. He was successful. He was a great guy, except for this one little issue, this one little vulnerability that he had. Everything was great and together in his life except for this one thing. And I think that it troubled him. I think that he went to bed at night and couldn't sleep because of this issue, and he didn't know what to do about it. I'm sure that he went and sought help wherever he could find it and wanted to find some cure, wanted someone to heal him, someone to use their religious clout and whatever religions he was following to cure him and help him out, or he would pay anybody whatever he needed to get help from this issue. And so he's open to whatever at this point. It's this issue of vulnerability in his life. In verse 2. Now, bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. And she said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." And so you have this young girl, we don't even get her name, but she was an Israelite. The Aramean army had sent out these raiding parties, would go into these towns along the borders, out in the wilderness where they were vulnerable, where there were no defenses set up, and they would go in and raid them and take their riches, take whatever they wanted with them, take their people. This family had never seen that YouTube video. Hide your kids, hide your wife, because she got taken, and so here she is in this foreign country, in this foreign place, as a servant to this commander of this other army. Her enemy was now her master. And so she's found herself in a rough spot. She's found herself in a bad place. And in that moment, whatever's going on, we don't get a whole lot of backstory, but she chooses to share information with her enemy that is for her enemy's best. That is for his good. And she says, if only he would go and see the man of God, the prophet in Samaria, where I'm from, he could heal her. He could heal him. He could take care of his issue. And she's one of my favorite characters in this story. This is all we get from her. But still, and this is even what the sermon's about, but we get this little picture of this individual who's been taken away, who's not in her homeland, who's vulnerable herself, and yet she chooses to share good news with someone else to deal with their greatest area of vulnerability, with their greatest hurt. There's Christ written all over this story and through this person's life, through this young woman's life. But we go on. Verse 4, Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl had said to him. By all means go, the king of Aram replied. I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothes. Because, everybody needs new clothes. So tons of money. I'm going to send you with all this money. I'm going to send you with 10 sets of clothes. Commentaries that I read, they said, hey, clothes were a big deal back then, all right? And so, hey, if you got 10 sets of clothes, you have something to bargain with. So the letter that he took to the king of Israel read, with this letter, I'm sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy. So the king of Aram thought, well, I'm a king. I know how kings work. You tell people to do stuff and they do it. So I'm going to write a letter to the other king, and I'm going to tell him, hey, this is my boy Naaman. He's a good friend of mine, and I want you to cure him of his leprosy. So you do what you got to do over there in your nation. Talk to your prophets, your men of God, or whatever it is you do, and let's get him healed, all right? Let's do it. All right, so that's the letter that he sends. Well, as soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he's trying to pick a quarrel with me? So here we see this king's issue. King Jeroboam, I think was his name, and he did not trust God. It didn't even dawn on him to think, oh, I should talk to the man of God about this because I don't have anything. I don't even know what to do about this issue. I don't cure people. I don't heal people. Can I bring from death to life? No, I can't do that. But his immediate thought, and probably his own issue of vulnerability and insecurity, says, oh, I know what he's up. I know what he's doing. He's trying to pick a fight with me. He's trying to go to war. And so imagine the whole scene that here comes Naaman, the commander of this army, and his whole entourage rolls up into Jerusalem, into the king's palace, and says, hey, I got a letter for you. And he stands there, waits for him to read the letter, and he's like, yeah, what's up? And so here's the king like, oh, great, here's the commander of this army, and he just strolls right in here. And here we are, we're vulnerable, our insecurities are all coming out, and so he's freaking out. And he says, I don't know what to do with you right now. And so he says this, he tore his clothes, tore his robes. So it's an issue. Again, the whole clothes thing. Clothes are important. So if you're really upset, you tear your clothes. It expresses how mad or whatever you are. So verse 8, when Elisha, the man of God, heard the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message. Why have you torn your robes? It's a big deal, apparently. Have the man come to me, and he will know that there's a prophet in Israel. Have the man come to me, and then he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. See, again, here's the man of God, Elisha, and he says, okay, my job is to point people to God. And so I know that if he comes to me, there's an opportunity for me to point him to God. And so he says, have him come to me. Let's deal this. Let me deal with this. So Naaman went with his horses and his chariots, and he stopped at the door of Elisha's house. In verse 9. And Elisha sent a messenger to him and said, go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. So I don't know if you get the whole picture here. So here comes Naaman's back in his hometown. He says, all right, I've got this leprosy issue. This girl says, here's the cure. He's like, I'll do whatever it takes. All right, king, write me a letter. Let's go get this taken care of. King writes him a letter. He rolls in there with his whole army and his chariots, and he's like, all right, let's do it. He's got this big load of gold and sets of clothes, and so he's got everybody to protect that. They've got weapons and everything. He's looking legit rolling in here. And so he goes to the king. King's like, I don't know what to do. Then he finds out, oh, okay, I can just go see Elisha. He lives way out there on the back 40s, dusty little house. Good luck finding him. So he rolls out there where prophets live, not in any extravagant place, nothing special, out in this area called Samaria where there wasn't much going on out there. And so he goes and finds him and comes up to his front door. And he says, all right, here I am. Let's get this thing cured. Come on out, man of God. Ready to see what you got for me. Let's do this. And Elisha sends out his messenger. Elisha doesn't even bother to come out and see him. And he says, all right, so Mr. Naaman, sir, my master Elijah said you should just go wash in the river 7 times and you'll be healed. See ya. And he takes off. So Naaman is like, what in the world? He probably just said his name at this point. He's like, nah, man. But Naaman went away angry and said, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of his Lord, wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. I thought that's what he was going to do. I thought there was going to be some big ceremony or something like that. That I would come out here and then this man of God would probably come out and he'd probably just float out of there. And then he'd probably just come over here and say something awesome and wave his hands up in the air and do this sweet magic trick. And it's going to be sweet. There'll probably be lights come on from nowhere and smoke and all this stuff. It's going to be amazing, right? I thought that's what he was going to do. Are you kidding me? Just go wash or not? Verse 12, are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters in Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? So he turned and he went off in a rage. Here we see Naaman's pride. Naaman had expectations. He thought this is the way it should go. He had thoughts, as it said right there. I think this is what's going to happen. I think this is how it's going to be handled. And his expectations were crushed. What he thought would happen didn't happen. What he was being asked to do is not what he expected. See, he'd probably taken steps before to deal with this issue, this leprosy thing, this area of vulnerability in his life, and nothing had worked. I'm sure he had tried taking a bath. Surely, when you have dirty skin, something's going on, you go and try and wash. And because I've done that, Mr. Elisha. I've done that, man of God. Why would I go to your dirty little river anyways? The Jordan River is this little stream that runs down through the middle of Israel, a small river. The Again, commentators, they say it's a muddy river generally. It's in the bottom of this valley. And you know where it flows to? It flows to the Dead Sea. What a great river. It goes to dead stuff. That's what you want me to wash in? Don't I have better rivers back in my home country? Again, commentators, they say these rivers that he quotes, that he mentions, they're like raging rivers, like strong flow, clear water, these beautiful places to go and be. Wouldn't that be a great river to go wash in? This is what I want. This is how I want you to cure me. This is how I want you to deal with my issue. His thoughts, his expectations, what he thinks should happen are crushed. He realized that he would have to humble himself to no longer be the big military commander that everyone respects and everyone is in awe of, everyone fears a little bit here in Israel. And he'd have to go and ride down to the River Jordan, get in his swim trunks, and go down into this muddy river and dip 7 times. To be humiliated, essentially. To do something simple, yet do something very hard for his pride, hard for his issues. So we began to see what was going on in Naaman's heart, where he's got this area of vulnerability, but he's also got this ego that he carries around with him, and he doesn't want to deal in the simple way that God asks him to be obedient. The man of God just simply go and wash, dip 7 times, and you'll be healed. He says, no, that's ridiculous. Surely I would have thought of that. I've already tried that. You need to do it this way. I'll be obedient, but only if you do it this way. And that's something we learn from this. And as we look into this story and we see that what God is calling him to is just simple obedience. And that's what he calls us to. And that's why we love this story. What's legendary about this story is it's legendary obedience. And often legendary obedience is just simple obedience. Go and do this. God speaks to us and says, go and do this. The biggest issue with simple obedience is our pride. We get in the way of that. Our desire for control, as Naaman wanted to control this whole situation. He wouldn't give it up and follow the leadership of what God was calling him to do. When we respond to God out of pride, several things happen. There's several reasons that we do this. The first one is this: we use our own logic and reason instead of trusting God's perspective. We use our own logic and reason instead of trusting God's perspective. If you're wondering, hey, am I responding out of pride? Is God calling me to something, but I'm being too prideful? Ask yourself these questions. Am I using logic and reason instead of trusting God? So like Naaman did, he said, I've tried that already. I've done that. I've got these rivers back home that are better than this. I think it should happen this way. He's thinking through, he's like, this doesn't make any sense. Why would I go wash in your dirty river? Why would I do it my way? Why wouldn't you do it like I think you should do it? We began to respond to God's call in our life by reasoning and coming up with all these reasons why that wouldn't work. That's silly. I'm not going to do that. What are people going to think? What do I do? Why would I do that? It's too simple. It's too easy. And in some ways, we forget that God is God. And we began to scooch ourselves into that place of God in our life. Oftentimes when we teach theology classes, the staff we've done a few times, and have the chance to talk about God's sovereignty. One of the illustrations I love to talk about is in God's sovereignty is just take out a pen like this and begin to think about time and the expanse of time and the time that's happened in history and what have you. And if you look at this, you could say, okay, if this end of the pen is when God created the heavens and the earth in the beginning of time, and he said, and he spoke, and it was, and it's right here. And then obviously right there is Adam and Eve, and you began to go ahead a couple hundred years and began to see the different other stories. We see Abraham that we learned about last week, and began to see a couple hundred more years, and Moses and that whole story, and began to see the whole stories of the Old Testament. And then Jesus comes right about here where the little rubber piece starts right here on the pen, and Jesus comes in, and the Son of God walks on the face of the earth, and he does what he does, and then the church starts, and then history happens, and then the church grows and begins to be the church of the Roman Empire and Constantine, all that kind of stuff. So then we move up here, and here's the Reformation, and the printing press, and all this other stuff happens. And we continue to go on, and somewhere out here, somewhere is us. And we're right here about midway, and then there's still more time to come, and began to see, this is our perspective, and this is what it looks like. You see this history and this timeline of things. Now, if this is how we see things and this is our perspective, this room is God's perspective. Whoa, that's mind-blowing. His perspective is so much bigger and larger than ours, other than this one-dimensional timeline of things. God sees it from all ways. Another way to see that, a popular illustration to talk about God's sovereignty and how he sees everything is if you were to go to a parade, if you were to go up to Coeur d'Alene in the Thanksgiving parade this weekend or the homecoming parade a few weekends ago, and if you would have stood right in the middle of the parade, you would see one float go by and a band go by and the team comes by and the fire engine comes by one at a time. And so you experience time in that way. God's perspective is as though he's hovering above the parade in a hot air balloon, and he sees it all at one time, both the beginning and the end and all the points in between. He sees time. His perspective is so much greater than ours. So he knows what's going on. And so our pride sometimes slips in there and says, no, I've got it figured out. I know what's going on, God. I see what's happening. I see the plan. I see what needs to happen. You need to listen to me and you need to do things the way I want to do them. Our pride gets in the way of our obedience. It's like my kids. We have 3 kids at this point. All of them are potty trained, kind of, most days. And as a parent, I know when my child needs to go to the bathroom. Why? Because he does the pee-pee dance. We all know what that looks like. He starts doing this little deal, And so he's watching some TV show or he's playing a game with whatever, and they start dancing or whatever. And he's like, "Do you need to go to the bathroom?" No, I'm fine. "Are you sure you don't need to go to the bathroom?" "I know you need to go to the bathroom. You just woke up from a nap. It's time for you to go to the bathroom. You need to go to the bathroom." "No, I'm okay. As a parent, I know what's going on. In the same way God knows what's going on. He looks at us and he says, Are you doing the insecurity dance? I see you trying to find security in find your identity and all these things, and you're doing this little dance in life. Are you doing that dance where you try to find, or you're avoiding responsibility? You're spending all your time on these things, on these games, on these movies, on these activities or whatever, but you're avoiding responsibility and the things that you need to be doing, you've been called to do. You're doing this dance." And he looks at our life and he says, "I know what's best for you. I know what you need. I know what you're called to. I know what I have for you. Follow me, be obedient. Follow me, be obedient." Simple obedience. And too often our pride gets in the way and we reason our way out of it. We logistically say, now's not the time. It's not right just yet. I'll put it off. I'll do it next week. I'll do that later. I'll wait till after the break. The second thing that we do often is we devise our own plan based on our expectations. Again, we said it. We saw Naaman. He had expectations of how this would work. I'll show up at his house. He's going to come out, wave his hand over it. Big ceremony, smoke, lightning. This big trumpets are going to blare out of nowhere. It's going to be awesome. He had expectations of how this is going to work. Oftentimes, our expectations are built on sometimes when we know we have them until we realize they've been crushed. I'm sure rolling up there, maybe in his mind, if someone had asked him, "Hey, what do you think is going to happen?" Naaman might have said, "I don't care what he asks me to do. I'll do anything." And then when he says, "Go wash in the river 7 times, it's like, "Yeah, I'll do anything but that. That's silly. Here, let me tell you why." We don't realize our expectations are not met or we don't realize we had expectations until they're not met, until they're crushed. I talk about this all the time with young couples who are pursuing marriage. My wife and I, we do pre-marriage counseling as several other pastors do, and expectations is a huge deal going into marriage. A lot of times you don't even know you have them beforehand because you say, "Oh, that's just what I've always seen. That's how I assumed it worked. When I do this, you do that, and that's just the way it works." And oftentimes holidays is the time as we move into Thanksgiving, Christmas. This is when expectations get crushed all the time for young couples because they say, they think, well, growing up, this is how we do holidays. On Thanksgiving, I watch football, and then the ladies, they go make the food, and they do the stuffing, and they do it just right, just like my mom always did it. And when they make their sweet potatoes, they put marshmallows on top, just like my grandmother always did it. And then Thanksgiving comes around and she's saying, "Hey, come and help me in the kitchen with this. Hey, you want to help me cut up potatoes? It'll be fun. We can do it together." It's like, no, that's not how it works. I have these expectations. Didn't you know? I thought that's the way all families worked. Well, you don't put marshmallows on your sweet potatoes? That's disgusting. So all these expectations get crushed and you don't even know it until they're crushed. And this is the way it's supposed to be. This is the way I want it. And you recognize you have expectations and begin to say to yourself this language of I. This is what I deserve. This is what I want. This is what I've earned. This is what I'm entitled to. because of who I am, because of my position, because of, don't you know who I am? We begin to say this language regardless of the circumstances of the situation. We begin to say, don't you know who I am? My position. This is what I've done to get here. This is what I've done. I deserve this. This I language of expectation that we place on others, whether we communicate it to them or not. And those expectations get in the way of us trusting God and being obedient to what he's calling us to do. The third one is this. We think more about what others think than what God desires. Sometimes when God's calling us to obedience, we think more about what others think about us than what God calls us to. So if God's calling us to obedience and he says, go and do this, you need to have this conversation with this person. You need to meet with me and do this. You need to say this in that class. You need to go and meet with your roommates and talk about that. You need to talk to your mom about this issue. And we began to process through, okay, what's that going to look like? Let me think about this situation. How's that going to play out? And in doing so, we began to question God and began to question, is that right? Is that really? I mean, if I do that, what are they going to think of me? That's going to make me look stupid. I don't know how to handle myself in that situation. What am I going to say? I don't know. What are they going to think of me? Just like Naaman. I don't want to go wash in that dirty river. Come on. I'll go home to my sweet river. Those rivers I had back home, I'll wash in those. Is that cool? And began to think about how is this going to make me look. And we began to think about what others think more than what God thinks. We began to trust what others might do or might say more than what God has called us to in his infinite perspective. It gets in the way of obedience. And our pride and our self steps in the way and says, nah, I can't do that. And see what continues to happen as we continue to read verse 11. So, but Naaman went away angry, and he said, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord. Are not these other rivers, skipping ahead in 12, are not these other rivers better? Oops. One moment, please. There we go, 13. So Naaman's servant, in verse 13, Naaman's servant went to him and said, my father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? So his servant comes to him and speaks some clarifying truth to him and says, what if he told you to go, rob a bank? What if he told you to go slay a dragon or climb some mountain or cross the desert or do something awesome? You would have done that, wouldn't you have? Well, yeah, probably. I mean, that sounds awesome. That would have made me look good. Okay, if you would have gone and done something really difficult, really arduous, really death-defying or something, you would have gone to do that. Why not go do just a simple thing? He said, go and wash. Why don't you just go do that? So he went down and he dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him. And his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. So this is twice now that Naaman has this issue in his life, this area of vulnerability where he's saying, okay, I want help in this, but I kind of want to control how it's going to happen. But up until this point, back home, nothing had worked. So he's open to whatever. And who comes to him? Someone in his community, someone in his house comes to him and says, hey, there's a guy in Israel, in Samaria, a man of God, that he could heal you. So his community speaks into his life. This girl speaks into his life, and this person says, you need to go. And so he's, okay, I'll go. And he shows up, doesn't go as he planned, his expectations are crushed. And who comes to him but his servants again? Those that are with him and his entourage, those that work with him, his co-workers, his friends, and they come to him and they say, man, what's the big deal? Why don't you just do it what the man of God said to do? It's simple. Just go and wash. In dealing with matters of obedience, we need the community of believers around us. We need others around us to speak truth and clarify what's happening in our lives. Because sometimes we get so skewed, our understanding of what's right and what's wrong, our reasoning, our expectations, our ego issues come into the way and they cloud them. And sometimes we need somebody just to speak truth to us and say, hey, calm down, listen, be obedient. I say this all the time. site pastor in the Damascus side, regularly have students and people in our church come and they say, hey, I need to talk with you about some stuff. I've got some issues. I've got some stuff going on in my life. And so we set up a time, we sit down, and I just open it up with a question. So tell me what's going on. What's the issue? What's happening? And then a lot of times that's all I say. And then they start talking through the issue and giving me the circumstances and the rundown and kind of processing through their decision-making process. And I just listen. A lot of times in speaking, they figure it out. They're like, I see what God's saying. I see what I need to do. Sometimes I need to throw in a few words of correction or clarification to what they've said. But a lot of times we just need each other to listen to each other. Because we get boggled all up in our mind. We need to discuss it. We need to get it out loud. We need to put it out there. A lot of times what God is already saying to you becomes more and more clear as we share it with one another. This is why exploring God is better in community, our little catchphrase here at Resonate. We believe that. I need you. We need each other to be a part of each other's lives. There's this little scripture in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. It's in there in this passage. We looked at it back in the spring of Paul speaking to the church. He said, we need to be a part of each other's lives. Don't push each other away, but let each other in. Submit to one another. Be vulnerable with one another. Open your life up to each other out of reverence for Christ. Because of what Christ has done for all of us, we realize we all can't do it on our own by ourselves. We need each other. So make yourself vulnerable to others. And the reality is that God has gifted everyone with something. He's given them experiences and talents and understanding, and all of those things are opportunities for us to learn. And so to have community, to have people around us, we need that to live life as God created us to experience it. We need people in our life if we're going to be obedient, to walk in simple obedience, to walk in legendary obedience. We need others in our life. Verse 15. Then Naaman and his attendants went back to the man of God, and he stood before him and said, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept as a gift for your servant. Wow, what a heart change. Finally, he goes and does it. His community around him says, why don't you just go do it? He goes, back in verse 14, he goes and dips himself 7 times as the man of God had told him. And his flesh is restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Man, there's a heart change. He says, oh my God, I've encountered the God. I've encountered the God that the man of God represents. And he rushes back, chariots flying, horses ablazing, rolls back up to Elisha's house, and he says, oh my goodness, thank you. Now I know that there is a God, and there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant. And the prophet answered, as surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing. And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. So Naaman, again, he wants to give all the glory to God. He wants God to get the credit. Probably why he didn't come out in the first place when he just sent a messenger out, because he didn't want to be associated with doing the miraculous. He wanted this man Naaman to experience God himself. And surely that's what God wanted him to experience as well. That's why he called him to the simple step of obedience. Just do what I'm asking you to do. Go and bathe 7 times in the Jordan River and you'll be healed. And he did, and he was. And so I love this picture of a changed heart. How he humbles himself. Finally, he gets out of the way. He sets aside his reasoning. He sets aside his expectations. He sets aside what other people are going to think about him, and he just does it. Takes simple steps of faith, and he sees God's faithfulness, as we talked about last week. He takes simple steps of obedience, and he gets to see God provide. He gets to see God work. He goes on and he does this. As Elisha says, no thank you, I don't want your sets of clothes or any of your money. He says, I will not. If you will not, said Naaman in verse 17, please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry. For your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also. When I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. And Elisha says, go in peace. So we see this transformation take place. He says, no longer am I going to follow these other gods, but I discovered the God of Israel. He said, since you won't take any of my stuff that I brought for you to pay for this, to earn this, to give you, so I could go back and tell all the boys back home, man, I got healed, but man, you should have seen what I had to do. I had to go slay a dragon, and look at how much it cost me. No, he didn't get to say any of that. All I got to say was simple obedience. I had to go do this little thing. And it was a little hard to get over with my pride a little bit, but it was pretty easy, and I was healed. And I encountered God. Through my simple obedience, I encountered the God. And he asked this strange request, let me have a little bit of dirt. Actually, a lot of bit of dirt. Enough dirt that 2 mules can carry it back. And he goes back, and again, reading on this, his intent was, I plan to worship the God of Israel in my country. And I want to take a little bit of where I encountered this God, almost like as a memento of this experience. I want to take it back with me so I can always remember this God. And when I go into this temple of these other gods with my king, because I have to, it's part of my job, may he forgive me. And may he know that deep down in my heart, I'm not really worshiping him. But I'm going to take, this is me drawing some stuff out. I'm going to take a little bit of that dirt, put it on the ground there, as though I'm kneeling here in the nation of Israel and praying to the God of Israel. He had an encounter with God through a simple obedience that changed his life forever. Keeping in mind that this guy wasn't even part of the nation of Israel. He was on the outside, and yet God pursued him through strange circumstances of sending this little girl through what seemed like a terrible situation to go and share this truth that there's a man of God who can heal you. And if that man of God heals you, actually you're going to encounter the God. And his life was changed through that simple obedience. Resonate for us here tonight. All of us have a different story. Some of them are similar, some of them are very different. We have different backgrounds, we have different issues. And in all of our lives, God is wanting to speak to us. There is a God and he wants to speak to you. There is a God and he's calling you to obedience. He has something for you. He has life for you. You have a vulnerable issue. Sometimes you realize it, sometimes you don't. You have a sin issue. You have issues in your life that you're trying to avoid, you're trying to cover up, you're trying to find security in something else. And you say, no, just simple obedience. Follow me. And there's simple steps in that he's been calling you to do all semester. That conversation you need to have, that how you need to organize your time so you can spend some time in the Word, spend some time with God. That he's calling you to be obedient. And so as we have this opportunity here in these moments, I want you to ask God in this moment, say, God, what are you saying to me? How are you calling me to be obedient this week? What simple steps of obedience can I walk in this week? And I'm thinking through this. I tried to give you some training wheels. I tried to think through our lives and think, what does this week afford us? Thanksgiving week. What does this afford us in ways that we can connect with God? And I want you to think through this as you're asking yourself that question, God, what are you saying to me? And I want you to hear some different ideas of what God may be saying to you and how you can respond to what God is saying to you. First one is this. Use your free time to connect with God. Use your free time to connect with God. Many of you are out of school this week. Many of you don't have to work quite as much. You get some days off. You're going to have some downtime. And you could spend that time staying up late watching movies and playing video games and just dorking around or whatever. Or you could say, all right, I'm going to specifically take some of this time and I'm going to use it on purpose. I'm going to spend some time reading the Bible. I haven't done that much this semester. I haven't done that much in a while. I haven't done that ever. One of the best ways that God communicates through us is through his scriptures, through the Bible. It's his specific revelation to us, of him saying, hey, this is who I am. Read these stories. Read these things that I've said. And you'll know who I am. And you'll be able to walk in obedience with so much more clarity. And so, or spend some time in prayer. Maybe you don't have a regular discipline of setting aside time in your life and in your week and praying to God. And God is saying, just spend some time with me. Talk to me. Tell me what's going on in your world. I know what's going on, but I want to hear you talk to me. And I've got some things to say to you. Prayer is not just talking to God, but it's also listening to him. So sit down and write out your prayers, journal them out. I encourage you in these moments as God is speaking to you and you're saying, God, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to be obedient? I want you to make some commitments in these moments. And so maybe you need to say, okay, God, every day at 10 o'clock after I'm up and I'm at them, God, I'm going to do these things. I'm going to spend some time journaling. I'm going to spend some time in the Word. The second one is this: mend the relationship. This is one of the most stressful times sometimes for some of us, is the holidays. We have to go back home and see some family that, man, things just aren't good there. Ever since I left home, it's been hard. Or maybe this is a time when you can give your roommate a call. You've had a few days of space between them. All the dishes are clean for right now. They haven't worn in your clothes in several days. So maybe you need to call them up and you need to talk through some stuff. You need to mend a relationship. You have some extra time this week. You're going to see those people you haven't seen in a year. You need to talk through some of those things. Mend a relationship this week. Third one is this: be still. Be still. Life is busy, I get it. You feel like you're the busiest you've ever been. Usually that's whatever's going on in your life right now, you're the busiest you've ever been in your life. Except for this week. Again, you have some time off. And in that, maybe you just need to slow down. You've been going so fast. You've got projects and tests and deadlines and issues. And man, from sun up to sundown, I'm just going. Man, this week, just be still. Know that he is God. Be still. Let God be God in your life. Quit trying to be God yourself. Quit trying to figure it out on your own, and be still. Last one's this: talk to people in your life about what God is saying to you. Again, as we mentioned, Naaman needed others in his life to clarify what was good and what was best. You need people in your life to clarify what is good and what is best. And so this week, maybe you haven't had a chance to catch up with that friend from back home in a while, but you need to get together with him or her. You need to talk to him. Or maybe again, in the free time that you have, set up some time to hang out with some friends that you have and say, hey, this is what God's been teaching me, or this is what I think God is saying to me. Will you help me process through this? Spend some time with people. Don't get completely introverted and check out with all your relationships this week. But purposely choose to spend some time with people. What is God saying to you in this? What is God saying to you? We've been talking about legendary obedience, and that's true. The stories about legendary obedience of Naaman, how he got over himself, how he moved through it, and God provided, God showed up. The other topic that we could talk about with this passage of Scripture is legendary mercy. Legendary mercy. That God, the Almighty God who sees and knows everything, pursues us, wants to know us, wants us to know him. He pursues us, and even though we don't deserve it, there's nothing we can do. There's no great act that we can follow through. There's no mountain we can climb, dragon we can slay, huge thing that we can accomplish in our obedience to him that he says, oh, now you've earned it, now I'll be nice. No. And he works the circumstances of our life, just like he did in that young girl's life and in Naaman's life, the circumstances that he puts together where he wants to speak to us and pursue us and clarify what he's calling us to do. And that's his mercy. The band's going to come up here and we're going to sing, and I want you to continue to process. If you need to stand and sing together and sing about God's mercy, let's do that. If you need to sit and you need to think, you need to write down, God, this is what you're calling me to do, and put that on a piece of paper, stick that in your pocket. So when you wake up tomorrow morning, you'll know that's really what he said. You won't think, oh, that was just some weird feeling I had, because you'll rationalize it and you'll think, oh, that's silly. I'm not going to do that. And you'll begin to play that pride game. And he's saying, no. Be obedient, simple obedience. There's something he's calling you to do. Let's be movable. Let's do that. Let's be obedient. Father, we thank you for tonight. We thank you for this passage of Scripture and this story that communicates your pursuit of us, communicates your mercy, that even though we don't deserve it, God, you love us and you pursue us and you want us to know you. You want us to know that there is a God. You want us to know that you are God, that you are our God. God, you love us. Help us to know that you love us. God, you call us to obedience. God, help us to know what to do. Speak to us and help us to get over ourselves, to look past ourselves, to trust you enough to lead us and guide us. God, I pray that over Resonates, and I pray that for us. I pray that for myself. God, speak to us. That we may walk in simple, legendary obedience. I pray this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.